what does this mean if these tariffs do go into effect as planned in just about 2 days' time?
So the biggest impact will be on the American consumer because much of this cost is going to need to be passed on. But our companies are also very concerned about the Chinese retaliatory tariffs that will be brought to bear on them in the China market. That makes them much less cost competitive with their competitors in the China market. It also makes their upstream inputs from the United States more costly. So these are the types of concerns we're looking at now.
It sounded as if there was a little bit of outreach from the Chinese ministry today, potentially calming the waters. That's why we were looking at the futures up by about 280 points right now. Do you put any faith in that? Do you have think that this is something that could be an entreaty?
I think that there is no alternative to returning to the negotiating table, and the Chinese government certainly sees that. So as we look forward to September and the potential for a new meeting, I think our expectation is that the Chinese will come, talks will happen, and that hopefully we'll get these things back on a more constructive and positive trajectory.
So, Jake, I don't know whether you view it this way, but do you think the president gets emboldened that every time we get an initial sell-off in the stock market from the new announcement of tariffs, it seems like within a couple of weeks, we're back to challenging the old highs in the stock market? So the worst-case scenario that's constantly being put forth by lobbying organizations for retailers or your group or whomever, when it doesn't come to pass, the worst-case scenario, do you think that's because there's always the hope that the tariffs aren't implemented and that the market's thinking they're going to be pulled back? Or do you think that the market rallies in the face of this because maybe long-term it's a good thing? I can't. Would you prefer the market was going down so it emboldens your case?
We certainly would not prefer the market to be going down. However, I would note that many of the tariffs that have been implemented to date have been primarily on B2B products. There have been a consumer product here or there. But ultimately, the products that we're looking at in List 4 tariffs, both in September and then also in December, they will have a more direct impact on the American consumer. So we'll have to see what effect that has on their pocketbooks and how that impacts their views of the president and the administration's trade policy. But our expectation is that they will begin to feel those costs going forward.
Just reading between the lines with Trump, there was a time when he actually called it play money. With the amount of the market had gone up, he thought he had some breathing room to deal with some of these other issues.
It doesn't feel quite as much
And I'm just thinking he gets emboldened when, I mean, last week, what was a 600-point day, right?
600-point down on Friday.
And now we're probably
he came out and made some comments before we opened on Monday morning.
And now we're back up from there. And so that he hasn't said the tariffs aren't going to go in. And so I just think that might embolden him. We keep going back to new highs, and even people at this network, every time we go down 1,000, they tell you the market cap loss, and then they slowly see it go back to even.
But the president is watching measures like what he sees in the markets. He's also watching the economy. Jacob, what do you hear from your members? When will they actually raise prices on consumers? When would this have a boomerang effect? Are we talking next week? Are we talking next month? Are we talking the end of this year?
It's very complicated to say. First of all, our companies have had a significant amount of inventory that's been brought into the United States in expectation of these tariffs. That's certainly going to offset some of the cost. They're also trying to share the costs with their suppliers, who will take a percentage of that, and they're taking a hit on their margins. Look, our companies don't want to pass these costs on to consumers, and to the extent that they can, they will try not to. But the reality is that these are on products with significantly narrow margins, and the reality is some of that cost is probably going to need to be passed on. Now, whether that happens after Christmas or before, much is going to depend on how these tariffs are implemented and how our companies are able to manage those costs.
I mean, we've heard Walmart is one of the companies that's on the board as one of your members. We've heard from Walmart. They think they're going to be able to navigate this better than others. Other big companies have said the same. Target, where they can be a little more nimble in their sourcing. My guess is nobody wants to go first to be the one to raise prices and then suffer if they lose their customers to competitors.
So I'm not going to talk about any specific company, but I would note that there's a difference between a multi-category retailer and a single category retailer. I've heard from some that are in the single category space, it's much more difficult to shift those costs and to try and absorb them across their different categories. As a result, this is an extinction level event for some retailers. It's true that the multi-category side, there is going to be a little bit more flexibility, but we should be worried about those retailers who are going to have to potentially go out of business or pass on the costs to the consumers.